Hello, Glasgow. Thank you for having me. It's the first time in Scotland for me. Let me see how this works. Yes. I've never been to Scotland. I grew up in England, but I've never been up north. And I'm showing this picture, which is close to the place where I'm staying right now. And I thought this was a very interesting proposition, a very interesting place, because it's probably everybody knows this, at the hidden tea house or tea room. And I was asking who owns this place. Yeah, it's owned by one person, and there's all these little businesses going up there, and they have already rented the place for 15 years. And I was asking, what are they going to do with it? Well, we're allowed to stay, but who owns it? Yeah, there's only one owner. And next door, in a new parking lot on the same road, there's this empty parking lot, and he wants to convert the parking lot as well into nice creative spaces. And the interesting thing is about who owns this place. And we probably might get back to it later on in the discussion. And but I thought it was very interesting and surprisingly to stumble across this by accident just on my first visit to Glasgow. This is the NDSM shipyard. I heard already introductions that I thought, hey, we have quite a similar story. Glasgow and Amsterdam, a very important shipbuilding city in the old days, or a lot of engineering going on. NDSM was in 1937 the biggest shipbuilding area in the world. And also I heard yesterday, I went on the hop-on, hop-off tour to see Glasgow, and I heard that there were 200 ship or building companies, and now there are only 3. So that's interesting to hear. So we probably have a lot of things that we can share. I think I'm already going over my time now, Finn. But this is me. I studied at the university. I grew up in a time, I'm the Generation X, after the baby boomers, and there was no work, a lot of unemployment, and I had no clue what to do, and I couldn't find work, so I decided to go work. I managed to get some work on the Swiss Alps, and I've been goat herding for 2 years, alone, with a lot of goats, and making cheese every day. It was far away, and you had to walk for 2 hours. There was no transport, nothing. And I'm a city girl, actually. I grew up in London and in Amsterdam, and it was quite a surprise. And when I finished this, I said, if I can do this, I can do anything. So I came back to Amsterdam, and I thought, I want to be part of this do-it-yourself community. I want to work with artists, people that take their own initiatives, that are sort of out of the box, not in the mainstream field. And I got involved with a lot of big empty buildings along the River Eye, our river in the city, which was completely industrialized in the old days. And this is one of the buildings. I've been, all these, like at the Eye, the NDSM, or the Amsterdam has a river, and this river was not really part of Amsterdam. You know, the canals is Amsterdam, but this was sort of an area, no-go area. And in the 80s, it was all abandoned. All the industry left, the shipbuilding industry left. So you had all these empty warehouses, which were abandoned. And obviously from, the generation, unemployment, and we couldn't pay for the rent, etc. A lot of these buildings got squatted. So this is the Silo, which I work with the Silo Theatre Company, which squatted the Silo. It was one of the most popular subcultural places in Amsterdam. And this is Frieshuis Amerika, which I also, Amsterdam is not that big. I heard you were 600,000, we are 700,000 people, so we're sort of quite similar in amount of people as well. This was Frieshuis Amerika. This was a group, young skateboarders squatted this and built one of the best skate parks in Europe in this warehouse. Unfortunately, this building got torn down, but it could have been a perfect cultural house. And this is also another warehouse, Pakkers Wilhelmina, and this building is one of my examples from the people that squatted and also bought the building themselves. I learned a lot how to look at cities and the role of the users in being part of city development. Because these buildings were all squatted in the 80s, but in the beginning of the 90s, this was the ambition of Amsterdam. And they wanted to create this new city-state, financial state along the river. All the empty buildings were to be demolished. Yeah, the historical buildings, they set up a coalition of banks and insurance companies in the city called the Amsterdam Waterfront Finance Group. And they want to transform the whole river area into a new, very exclusive, expensive financial district. They want to be the top 5 of the world, etc. And they asked Rem Koolhaas, you probably know him, Oma, he's one of the famous Dutch architects, to make a master plan. And his master plan was Manhattan upon it IJ. And we occupy 12 of these empty buildings, and we've been there for 10, 15 years. We've put our effort, time, and money into these buildings, converted these buildings into great skate parks. We work with refugees that had no status but could set up a poetry cafe, etc. Craftspeople were in there, young people starting their own businesses, and also we had a lot of neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods. The threshold was quite low, so they could start their own business there as well, or activities. So we offered to participate in city development. We said, okay, you are the Amsterdam Waterfront Finance Group. We will be the alternative Amsterdam Waterfront Finance Group. But that was sort of confusing name, so we set up another name. We set up the name called the Guild of Industrial Buildings upon it IJ. And what we did, of course, they did not take us very serious. You are unemployed mothers and refugees and squatters and artists. You're not serious that you really want to participate in our city. Leave that to us. We are the specialists. We know how to do this. So we thought we should set up a think tank. We should invite people. So we invited people like scientists, architects, developers, venture capitalists, squatters, etc. And we set up a think tank, and we did 2 important things. You know the plans of Rem Koolhaas. He designed this beautiful new financial district on the river with sunny boulevards. We looked at the role of the end user in harbor buildings in rainy cities like Liverpool, Bristol, Stettin in Poland, Copenhagen, and all went to these harbor areas and looked at the role of the user redeveloping these old buildings. And this book is called The Turning Tide. And we also came up with an alternative way of city development. Like, why should all these historical buildings be torn down? It's so authentic, it makes a city so attractive. So we said you should actually start a developing tool that you develop from existing structures, both physical but also social. Like existing users in these buildings should be included in the future plans. And the city as a framework, we call the manifest, it's the stad als casco. Casco is a difficult word to translate, but casco is like the hull of a ship, the basic hull of a ship, or the basic framework of a building, you know, where there's no walls in it, but just the floors and the funding, etc. And we said these buildings are perfect to get reused. You can have a collaboration of users that invest in time and slowly develop these buildings. And because it's a collective or cooperative, the value of the buildings, it flows back to the community eventually. And it can also have developers who are more high market developers also participate, as long as we can stay there too. It should be both. So it's a different approach. But because I only have 20 minutes, I cannot elaborate too much. So, but it's an interesting story. And I'm now writing, this was a book published in 1997, which is actually so trendy at the moment again. So I'm writing a follow-up on this book, and it's also a follow-up of 20 years experimenting with the city as a framework method, and obviously I've learned a lot. And I'm going to add some new features to the theory, to the method. So the book will be published in November, and it's going to be in English, Japanese, and Korean, funny enough. So this is the NDSM shipbuilding warehouse. That's the big building. It's the biggest building with the roof, with the windows. It's 20,000 square meter, 15 meters high. At the end, it's 25 meters high, and at the east part, it's 8 meters high. And it was abandoned in 1984. And the city council, the city borough of Amsterdam North, set out a competition looking for a temporary user to redevelop this area, only for 5 years. You saw all the buildings, which I shown before, the big old buildings, which were all very successful initiatives, very popular. They were evicted in 1998. So 1,200 young people were on the streets. There was really a big shortage of affordable working space. And there was a lot of criticism on Amsterdam. Amsterdam, you're losing it. You're only focusing on the consuming of art and not on the production side of art. And there was a lot of criticism, and we had a lot of demonstrations. So this led to some awareness, and that we had a mayor said there's no culture without subculture, etc. And we wrote the book, The Turning Tide, and we had the city as a framework theory about another way of looking at city development and how we can have more people involved in city development. But despite all that, all the buildings were evicted. Some of the buildings were torn down, and we had to move somewhere else. Now, I've worked with theater companies, site-specific theater companies, and I knew the NDSM ware from a performance we did there in 1994. So when we got evicted, and this is like the north part, because all the old buildings before were on the south part. So we thought, let's go to the north. North was like totally derelict. Nobody had any interest in the north, and everybody thought we were crazy. So I started, and like in the brochure, you said it's led by Eva. No, I'm not the leader. I'm just one of the initiators, together with skateboarders and unemployed mothers. They had specialized themselves in straw bale building and building with recycled materials, and their dream was to build a restaurant out of recycled materials, and the skateboarders want to build a skate park, but nobody took us serious. You're not entrepreneurs, you're unemployed, you're young and artistic, and blah, blah, blah. So we thought, okay, let's enter the competition, and we are going to come up with an idea, sort of like to create a place where things can happen which can happen nowhere else. And they were sort of like, we were sort of naive at that time, but of course they wanted to have us sort of, make it more interesting. But we won the competition because we had a plan that we are going to transform this building with 500 end users, and so we have to really focus on community building and getting enough people together to actually invest and design and build our own city within the warehouse, and also make a restaurant on the outdoor premises. And we won the competition, and we won a ruin with a lack of maintenance of 15 million euro. And we had calculated that if we want to build our own city in the warehouse, it will cost also 15 million euro. But the last part, the 15 million euro, we can account for with 500 people. We all pay rent, and we can get a loan, etc. So it's very interesting to look, or for us it was interesting to look at the financial part and how to create a group of people that are willing to invest and put their own money into it. It's not a very rich group, so it's a little bit of money. But if you have a lot of people, you can do a lot of things. But because we wanted to have a bottom-up project led by end users, we first moved in. There was already 1,200 people on the street, so it was very easy to find the first 70 people come into the warehouse, and we all drew a chalk line on the floor, and everybody could use a little space there to continue working, and everybody had to pay. That was the commitment. If you want to join our project, you want to be part of the community, you have to pay amount of money per square meter. And this is how we started to get organized. And with the first group, like 12 people of the first group, they set up the design team, because we wanted to design it ourselves as well. So we asked a philosopher and an architect and also a city planner, because we are part of a greater area, to workshop. And we came up with our own design to how to create, because we knew 30 million euro, that means we have to build or rent out 30,000 square meter of floor space, but we need to design how it's going to look like. So we designed it ourselves, and it was very, very difficult to find an architect who would be servile to our demands, because they all want to Yeah, the skate park had split levels, etc. No, 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 just one simple floor, etc. So it was quite difficult to find some good architect. So we came up, well, it was 15 million lack of maintenance. It was totally polluted. There was no roof. There was no infrastructure, no wall. There was sort of very crappy walls. But we set up a professional, or we set up an organization, a foundation, and we hired a little working group, you know, to do that for us. And we managed to sort of clean up the grounds. And we put up in the warehouse a framework, like the city has a framework. So you have this old framework of the building, and then we put a new framework in, and it's with streets and squares. It's actually designing a city, we realize now. And this framework is very cheap, and it can account for at least 10,000 square meter to rent out, and it only costs 2 million euro with infrastructure and electricity, etc., etc. And within this framework, every artist and every organization built their own studio. And actually, they own their own studio. So it's a collective ownership that the framework is owned by the foundation that represents us, but all our individual studios, it's our money. So we all put our own money in it. And I built, together with Layana, my office, like we've invested 50,000 euro in building it, obviously in time, but still, and you know, think about all the free time we put into it as well. That accounts a lot. And I show you a little film because it's sort of nicer to show that. And here's the people that have built their own studios and financed it. Oh, my voice is great with the film. This is a circus street artist. The Crane Hotel here. Yeah. So that was, sort of an impression how we built our city in it. This was like finished in 2007 already, this film I showed you. And on the opening, only a few minutes before the opening, we heard, because we are renting the building, we're not owning the building, we heard that the city council was selling it to a developer. So we actually only had 1 minute to enjoy our efforts and our investments of what we were doing. And that was really horrible. And that has, we can elaborate on that later, but it's because of the different elections and people getting into government, etc. But that really made it very difficult for us. And actually, since 2007, what you see now, nothing happened anymore because the owner of the building, the city, they put all their own managers into it, and they have no interest in doing something bottom-up. So something which was initiated bottom-up is now very much organized top-down. And this is now, in a few years' time, what you will see at the NDSM. The whole NDSM area has been bought in 2006, just before the crisis. It has been sold to one developer, not to different developers, but to one developer who has no interest in working together with the community or with entrepreneurs, etc. So this is quite a sad story. You see us there in the corner, so we're relatively sort of like okay, because they do appreciate us, But this is sort of the development which is going to happen. And in 2000, so we were heard in 2007 that our building was going to be sold. And thank God for the crisis. Sorry, but that's in 2008 the crisis. In 2011 the developer dropped out. And eventually we did manage, although we are not very happy with the management of our organization at the moment because it's very much led by the government, but because we are so popular and NDSM is now the most expensive part of Amsterdam with MTV, Greenpeace, etc., that they bought our foundation, which we once set up, which we don't have any influence in it. Interesting to talk about that later in discussions. The building has been bought right now. And just to conclude, we are not against commercializing the area. As we said, the city as a framework, we should develop from existing structures. And we are very happy with MTV coming in and Greenpeace, etc. And because also we won many prizes, being very innovative, we, a few years ago, we set up our own energy company, together with MTV and with Greenpeace and the old shipbuilders and the artists. And we want to be the first business district area that will be completely self-sufficient on their energy needs. So that's another approach of bottom-up, but then with other sort of stakeholders. So we are very much into that sort of way of thinking. And thank you. That was it.